Welcome to the podcast, Total Survey Design.
Welcome to the Total Survey Design podcast. Today we're talking about survey weighting, or what some people call post-stratification adjustment. We are going to define what weighting is, explain when it actually improves results, when it quietly makes them worse, and give you some practical advice on how to do it without shooting yourself in the foot.
Today, the reason we're talking about survey weighting is mostly because it's a topic we honestly don't know a lot about. Oftentimes, the best way to learn something deeply is to teach it to someone else, and that's really the whole reason this podcast exists. Sometimes we come to this mic not knowing a ton about the topic, and sometimes we're barely one chapter ahead of you. Weighting falls squarely in this category of barely one chapter ahead.
Here's the funny thing. I went all the way through grad school, took methods courses and seminars in my department, and not once did anyone utter the word weighting class. It just wasn't part of the culture of the sociologists I was around. Even when I asked Don Dillman about it once, he kind of shrugged and said he wasn't a huge fan. His advice was to spend your energy getting the best possible data up front so you don't need fancy corrections later. It is solid advice, really. But I also think it's important for us to know what weighting is, how to use it, and make a judgment for ourselves on when to use it. So, Sanyap, can you give us a brief definition of what weighting is?
Basically, survey weighting is a statistical correction that you apply after the data has been collected so that your sample looks more like the population on key characteristics. In real life, some groups end up being overrepresented in your data, or in some cases, some are underrepresented. Weighting just turns the volume up on the quiet groups and turns it down on the loud ones, so that the final picture is more accurate or more resemblant of your target population. Azrin, how would you explain weighting in simpler terms?
Think of it like this. Imagine a family with 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. The parents want to know where to go for a weekend trip, so they ask the kids. Somehow, they only manage to hear from 2 boys and 1 girl. The vote comes back, screaming for Monster Truck Rally. Both boys are all in. The 1 girl is indifferent, but she really prefers Disney on Ice. Without any adjustment, the parents would conclude that Monster Truck wins in a landslide. But if they weigh the responses so each boy counts as 1, and the lone girl counts 2 because she's standing in for her absent sister, suddenly it's a tie between Monster Trucks and Disney on Ice. I've personally been to both with my son, and I can confirm they're equally loud, just in different ways.
I guess the catch was when you give someone a big weight, you also give them a big megaphone for every single question on the survey, even the ones that have nothing to do with whatever made them underrepresented in the first place. That increases the uncertainty around every estimate. The standard errors get bigger, the effective sample size gets smaller, and sometimes the weighting ends up making the data less accurate. Then, what would be some real-life examples of weighting?
In proper probability surveys, the benchmarks we use usually come from the US Census, or more commonly now, the American Community Survey. Everyone gets a weight. Some people get a bigger weight, meaning they count extra. Some people are weighed down. When everything is added up and the weights are turned on, the sample percentages for age, sex, race, education, region, and whatever you choose all line up with the real world. When it works well, weighting can knock several points off the bias with only modest hits of the precision. Old school telephone surveys often miss young adults and overrepresent seniors. A little age and sex weighting routinely fixes most of that problem when we want to understand how the entire population feels about a certain topic.
But again, it's not always free of errors. The more extreme the weights get, the more the variance balloons. A good, gentle weighting scheme might cost you 10 to 30% of your effective sample size. A bad one can eat 70% or more. I've opened datasets where the headline said 2,000 completes, but the effective sample size after weighting was just under 500. That's a very expensive way to end up with a small survey. And just as a side note, an honest survey methodologist always reports the effective sample size in their findings. Now picture a high school with 400 students. You show up to do in-person interviews, but the entire senior class is on a field trip that day. Now you end up with almost no seniors, and later you discover that seniors are actually 25% of the whole student body. So you give the handful you did catch weights of 10 or 12 each to make the grade distribution look right. Now every school-wide question is being driven by those few seniors that you ended up interviewing for. If they all hate the cafeteria food, congratulations. You just proved the cafeteria is terrible, even if the other 3 grades love it. Precision is toast, pun intended.
So, when is weighting actually worth it? It shines when 3 things are true. First, you started with a genuine probability sample, where everyone had a known chance of selection. Second, you have trustworthy population benchmarks for whatever is out of balance. And third, the final weights stay reasonable. Almost nobody gets a weight of over 3 or 4. A classic example is a statewide random digit dial poll on a ballot measure. Young people answer the phone less, older people answer more, and doing some simple ranking or rim weighting to age, sex, and region usually fixes a couple points off bias and barely dents your effective sample size, and that's a win.
On the other hand, if your sample came from an online opt-in panel like Prolific or YouGov, or from volunteers who love taking surveys, please do not try to weight that mess to census margins. The reasons those people showed up and others didn't have almost nothing to do with demographics, and almost everything to do with interest, free time, trust, or personality. Forcing the age and race numbers to match just creates crazy weights and usually leaves you with more bias than when you started with. Now, only it's hidden. If you do decide to weight, here's how to keep yourself from regretting it. First, get the best benchmarks you can, almost always the latest American Community Survey numbers. Keep your categories broad, for example, somewhere between 5 or 10-year age bands, or 4 to 5 geographical regions. The second you get too granular, you may end up with empty cells or end up with one poor respondent with a weight of 25. You might think that having more detailed benchmarks is generally better, but it often gives you the opposite results, where having more granular benchmarks may over-adjust your collected data, such as where 1 or 2 observations get excessively weighted.
After calculating the weights, you might want to do some diagnostics. Check the smallest weight and the largest weight. Look at the histogram of the calculated weights, and especially the effective sample size. If any single weight is pushing 5 or higher, or if your effective sample size drops below about 60% of the raw count, simplify the schema or walk away. And when you publish your results, always report both raw number of respondents and effective sample size after weighting. One of my pet peeves is seeing published research that reports their original sample size but hides their effective sample size after weighting. That's because, as you know now, every time you apply weights, the effective sample size will become smaller than your original sample size. And not reporting your effective sample size is both misleading and dishonest.
The bottom line is, weighting is a powerful tool for real probabilistic samples when the imbalances are measurable and the fixes stay gentle. One thing to bear in mind is that weighting is not a magic wand for bad sampling frames or self-selection bias. The best thing you can do is this: start with the best sample you can possibly get up front, use weights only when it truly helps, keep the weights from running wild, and lastly, be honest about what the data can actually support.
Don't forget to subscribe.